Today we're going to look at one of my favorite games, Root, specifically the creepy Corvid Conspiracy. The first thing I want to talk about is to really get the Corvid Conspiracy engine moving. It really relies on putting troops onto the table. One of the things that you're going to notice is the recruit option, which is the third phase of Birdsong. This is going to allow you to spend a card of any color, and you get to take one soldier and put them on every clearing of that color. So if you spend a yellow card, you're going to be able to put one bird token on each clearing. So we're going to go ahead and do that real quick. So let's say I played a yellow card on the recruiting phase. I'm going to be placing these birds actually onto the table. This is really critical because in order to put your plot tokens into play, you're going to have to be removing your bird soldiers from the map. So we're going to go ahead and show that action. One of the things that I recommend is trying to get an extortion token into play as soon as possible. These tokens allow you to draw extra cards. These extra cards will allow you more and more options. Specifically, it gives you better options for recruiting since you have to spend a card to place your soldiers on the map, and then consequently your plot tokens are going to be coming from those locations and terrain where your troops are actually on the board. It's pretty important to have always a fresh set of cards. So by getting one extortion token into play as soon as possible is really key, so you can get actually 2 card draws per turn. Your plot tokens are essentially going to be useless if your enemy wipes them out before you can actually utilize them. So the one thing that you want to do is don't spread yourself too thin when you're putting down your plot tokens. So one thing that you can do as an action is you can reinforce certain locations with additional birds, and it will make it much more likely for your plot tokens to actually occur. And that's a way that you're going to score points. So you get 3 daylight actions that you can do. One of them is to move. Now, what's interesting about the Corvid Conspiracy, they don't actually have to control or rule a clearing in order for you to move. So as an example, I'm pointing to a Corvid that has equal presence in that clearing. Normally, you wouldn't necessarily be able to move unless you controlled the clearing that they're going to. In this case, it doesn't matter. So the Corvids are very flexible. So as an example, I'm going to use one of my actions to move a Corvid up to that other location with a Marquis de Cat symbol. Now, I'm also going to look at potentially other areas around it. If I really want to reinforce it, I could potentially reinforce a Corvid from the left top part of the map as well. So I'm going to spend another action to put down a hidden token into play. So as you do that, you remove a Corvid from the board and you're paying for it. Now, if I wanted to put additional sort of plot tokens into play, I would have to remove additional birds from that. But kind of on the first turn, I'm just going to make sure that I'm reinforcing that location, and I will be able to actually spend that token. We're going to talk really quickly about one of the Corvid's special abilities. It's embedded agents. And what this does is it allows you to deal an extra hit in combat if you have one of your plot tokens that are face down, so thus it hasn't been exposed. Really, really remember that. That will make your positions where you're trying to score points better defensible positions. As an example, since this plot token is face down, the Corvids would gain an extra hit when they're defending against an enemy player. So as an example, let's say Marquis de Cat attacks the Corvids and scores 2 hits. 1 hit would be scored by the Corvids, but you get an additional hit in return. So the token here actually allows the Corvids to wipe out the Marquis de Cat tokens, and then the Corvids perish in the attack. But the great thing is that plot token is still on the map, and that's how the Corvids are going to score points. Next, we're going to talk about the Snare and Raid token options for the Corvid faction. I think these are really great to play, and I really don't even care if I flip them over and my opponent knows what's there. It can actually change what they're doing, and once I actually flip those over, I get to score the points, so there's no way that they can use the exposure action against me to pull these off the table. So in my opinion, I want to get these snares and these raid tokens flipped over as soon as possible so I can score the points, and it actually kind of delays my opponent's actions, and I'll show you why. The raid token is a crossed sword and a crossed axe that you can see in the middle of the board. What this allows you to do is once that token is taken off the map, it actually gives you extra warriors, one for every adjacent spot on the map. So if this token gets wiped out in a battle, let's say the Corvids get wiped out, it actually allows additional Corvids to appear in every adjacent location. So something really great about that raid token, think of it as you spent one bird to put it out onto the map, and in return, you get 3 warriors back. So always look for locations with as many different adjacent locations as possible because you get more birds out of it. The other thing that it does is it will keep your opponent from attacking that. If this token is flipped over, they can score a victory point for taking it off the map, and it's kind of a juicy target. They want that victory point. But when you flip it over, they still get the victory point, but it's not as good because they know that you're going to be putting 3 warriors onto the map. So that's going to kind of stall a lot of players. They're going to look at that, and they're going to say, you know what, it's not worth it. And that's an interesting strategy. So if they don't take that out, it improves your ability to score points. But if they do take it out, you get something back. You get more warriors, and you could potentially put even more tokens out. So having this exposed on the map is actually really beneficial. It will kind of confound and confuse players. They won't know what to do. And a lot of times they won't take it out. So they will forego that victory point so you don't spread more forces all over the map. These snare tokens give you an excellent advantage when you're playing the Corvids. As an example, if a snare is placed into a location and it's face up, it doesn't allow your enemies to put any tokens or buildings into that location. So even though there's a recruiter for Marquis de Cat, you can't place forces onto the map of that location. Another thing that it does is it prevents movement out of that location. So these Marquis de Cat forces are basically stuck there. So they can't move to any adjacent location. And essentially what you've done in the center of the map is you've created sort of like a gridlock for troops. If enemy troops move into this location, they can't actually move out. So it gives you good board presence and board control until they wipe out this snare. So think of it as a way that you can impede troops' movement around the map, and you can use that to your advantage. In my opinion, it doesn't matter if that token is flipped up. The reason why is that then it's active, so you're preventing your enemies from moving about the board. So to summarize, the early game and mid game, in my opinion, use the snares, extortion, and raid tokens. Now, as you start moving into the mid to late game, start using these bomb tokens. And the reason why you want to wait a little bit later on is that when you're trying to score points, you want as many of these tokens on the map as possible. When a bomb is exposed and flipped over, it's actually removed from the table, and thus your scoring isn't going to be as effective. So the longer you wait to use the bombs, the better scoring you have. In addition, when you start hitting late game, there's going to be a lot of enemy tokens out on the map. So there's going to be large armies, there's going to be a lot of buildings and whatnot. So your explosives and your bombs are going to do maximum damage in the mid to late game because there's so many things actually out on the board. And what's great about the bomb tokens is that you get to remove all enemy pieces. So those are buildings, those are tokens, and troops. And remember, too, that you can score victory points if you're removing their tokens from the map. And you can remove them from multiple factions. So if you have a location where there's tons and tons of troops and tons of tokens, you flip one of these bombs over and it explodes and it destroys everything. Another problem with playing the bombs is that people are going to be genuinely terrified of it. And if they set one off, or you set one off on them, they know that they're going to lose everything. So it's going to be one of the best things to use the expose action on. So I recommend sort of using these mid to late game. Here's a great example of a location to use a bomb. We have Marquis de Cat faction, the Lizard Cult, and we have the Corvids all in this one location. When you flip the bomb over, you get points for how many other plot tokens you have active on the map, and it destroys all of your enemies, including tokens, from the board. In this case, you would score 2 victory points for removing these 2 buildings, which is fantastic, and then you also get the points for flipping the bomb token over. Why you kind of want to use these late to mid game is that once you remove it, you have to put it kind of back onto the board to score those points again, but you can just use those bombs over and over again. Let's kind of bring everything together. What you're going to be looking for is kind of avoiding combat. You don't want to be mixing it up with a lot of soldiers and troops. As an example, on the map, Marquis de Cat has a pretty strong presence on the right side of the board. That doesn't mean that you have to build over there. Build in locations like the upper corner where there is no enemy presence. It'll make it more likely for your tokens to be placed and then survive long enough for you to actually score. So think of it that way. You don't have to hit people head on when you're playing the Corvids. If you want to fight them, do it defensively. Do it on your terms. Put your plot tokens down, get those extra hits from them attacking you and whatnot, but do not be that really aggressive style of play. If you do that, you're going to lose a lot of your troops. If you lose your troops, you can't put the tokens into play. If you can't put the tokens into play, you can't score points. Every troop that you have on the board is super critical for building those plots and bringing them out into play. So always remember that. Try to avoid really massive skirmishes with the enemy. The whole point of the Corvids is to do things sneakily, manipulate your opponents, and this is a great way to do it by staying away from them and putting the tokens into play. As a final mention, crafting with the Corvids I think is pretty easy. You can craft actually from the tokens. They don't have to be face down or face up. It can be either way. So if you have a face down token, you can craft. If you have a face up token, you can do the same thing. Always remember that. It's not that they have to be face up for you to do your crafting actions. They can be either. You can have some of them up and some of them down. It doesn't matter at all. So be really cognizant and look for those really easy victory points, those one sort of resource crafting items, and even those twos. You can supplement your point total pretty quickly, and it's very easy to do. Always remember, though, if you're going to be doing some crafting, make sure that you have your extortion tokens out on the board so you can draw those extra cards and you have something to actually craft each turn. As one final note, when it comes to playing the Corvids, you don't have to always play the same way. Something that you'll notice when you have opponents and they start looking at your strategy, they'll be able to kind of figure out where you're going to be placing certain tokens. They can actually anticipate where you're going to put them. So to throw them for a loop, something that I like to do is to take the tokens into my hand, and away from them, what I'll do is I'll just kind of pick one at random and I'll look at it and then place it onto the board. And what this does is it kind of adds a little bit of variation to your play style, so they're not constantly anticipating each and every move. If you become too predictable when playing the Corvids, they'll be able to shut down your strategy. So throw your opponents a curveball every once in a while, sort of pick like a random token that you're gonna play. It doesn't have to make the most sense, but it'll mix things up enough that it'll keep your opponents guessing. And one of the things that you want to do when you're playing the Corvids is to confuse your opponents. Be a little bit random, be a little bit variable, mix it up a bit, and confuse them. The Corvids are a fantastic, fun faction to play in Root. What you're going to do is keep those plot tokens coming out and keep them on the board. The more you have on the board, the more points you score in successive turns. Don't let your opponents wipe out your tokens. Hopefully you've enjoyed learning some of the tips and tactics for these creepy crows. I want to thank you for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.